I'm Brittany, this is Shelianne, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we continue reading through Volume 2 of Self-Saving System. Previously on Self-Saving System, a couple of things may have transpired. We are currently being held by Linga for the next month while we await essentially trial. And day one was already kind of a big deal in terms of just events transpiring. And we are continuing today. We're on page 106, right at the scene break, which is at the bottom of the page. And oh, pardon me. And we usually read for a couple of hours and about 50 pages. So let me see right off the bat if there are any easy places to... And sort of, we could finish the chapter today if we got kind of... Well, we'd have to read a little bit extra for that, come to think of it. So we may have to play it by ear, but that's okay. We are Shinching Cho in this watery, acidy, prisony place. Just waiting around at the mercy of Linga for the next 29 days. Because as hard to believe as it is, we only read through the first day yesterday. So, we're just gonna go ahead and start. I'm a little terrified to think what another 29 days could possibly, if it even lasts 29 days. It may not, now that I think about it. It may be a shorter time period because she's tricksy and likes to be like, well, sure, it for certain has to be like this or this amount of time, and then she comes up with a reason to make it not be so. Pardon me, I don't know why my voice is gone. Weird, all of a sudden, it's been fine all day. Anyway, day two. I've worked past the rage quit, and now I am ready to embrace day 2. Don't break up chapter 8. Don't break up chapter 8. This is hilarious. I've got all the notifications in the world staring me in the face. 165. Hang on. Let me go back to that area real quick. Yeah, ending with chapter 9 would be a good place to end. So, like, finishing the chapter. Alrighty, we'll see if we just have to take a very, very short break. About halfway through, a little after 4, so that I can get up and walk around. So I'm not sitting quite so long in the same spot. But other than that, we'll see if we can make it that far. It's a Friday, you know. We should be able to get a little bit farther. Alright, yes. If you don't have tea, if you don't have the necessary preparations around you, now is the time to go do that. You'll get a second chance when we take a break in about an hour. But other than that, it is now or never. So if you don't have that cup of tea, go grab it. If you don't have that snack, go grab it now. Because I don't know what's coming, but it's gotta be something. It has to be something. I have both cups of tea here, ready and waiting. Alright, enough fucking around. Let's, okay. Alright. Shinching Cho had learned that whenever he tried to meet... I'm too excited. I'm already too excited. I'm sorry. Shen Qingqiu had learned that whenever he tried to meditate or clear his mind, there was always some form of outside disruption. For example, that time at the Lingxi caves, and now again in the water prison. The stone path rose, and the corrosive water curtains stopped flowing. Gangi Shia hurried down the path. With only a glance at Shen Qingqiu, his feet slipped out from under him. Senior Shen, you, he stammered. What about me? Shen Qingqiu had no idea what was wrong. Gangi Shia had a strange look on his face, like he didn't know whether he should turn on his heel and retreat. He hesitated on the edge of the stone platform without continuing farther. Following his gaze, Shen Qingqiu looked down. That robe, isn't it? Oh God, that's right. Other people are going to clock the rope. Okay. Isn't it? Gangi Shia said hesitantly. Shen Qingqiu sighed. Lo Binga's outer robe. Gangi Shia finally reacted. He coughed shortly, then asked, How has Senior Shen been these past 2 days? Shen Qingqiu replied, All right, okay, it's been 2 days now, so now we're on day 3, okay? Just keeping track. If he weren't so popular, he'd have been even more all right. Within the span of 2 days, 3 people had already visited. This luxury VIP single room in which he was temporarily detained must be the hottest, most popular suite in the history of Huanhua Palace's water prison. I heard that yesterday, Lo Shixiang was in a terrible rage when he left. This junior was... Me too. This junior was worried that he might have done something to Senior Shen. As Gangi Shia spoke, his eyes involuntarily drifted back to that black robe. Under his stare, Shen Qingqiu found himself pulling the robe tighter over his chest. Done what? Lo Binga had only thrown a tantrum and punched holes all over the place, collapsing half the cave. What's with that look in your eyes? Everybody thinks they're boning now. Everyone thinks they've already done everything. I'm okay. I'm alright. I'm alright. We're not going to get to the end of the chapter today if I keep having to stop in disbelief, so I just got to plow through. Hang on. There we go. All right. Shen Qingqiu sighed. Lo Binga has really taken to Huahuan Palace like a fish to water. Gangi Shia smiled bitterly. Not only that, Lo Shixiang's spiritual power is outstanding, his conduct unwavering, and his actions swift and decisive. Everyone else is left in the dust, so it's no wonder Shizun regards him so highly. If Lo Shixiang weren't so insistent on not taking Shizun as his master, I'm afraid I would never have a chance of becoming head disciple. Sincere sympathy seeped into the gaze Shen Qingqiu sent toward him. This junior came to see you about an important matter, Gangi Shia said resolutely. This morning, Peak Lord Shang requested an authorization pass from my master, but his application was delayed, and he doesn't know when he will be able to get through. He seemed to have some pressing business, and he asked this junior to bring a letter. As he spoke, he reached into his lapel. Fuck, it really was a letter, and it was only hastily folded twice, without even a wax seal or a sealing spell. Shang Xinghua, how daring! Please relax, senior. I've already looked through it, said Gangi Shia. Then relax my ass. However, I couldn't understand what it said. Shen Qingqiu let out an internal sigh of relief. Good, it looked like he had misunderstood. Shang Xinghua wouldn't fuck up that badly. In all likelihood, he'd used a secret code, so there would be nothing to fear even if someone did intercept it. Shen Qingqiu shook open the paper with 2 fingers. After skimming it, his face turned green. After reading 2 lines, his face turned white. All sorts of colors bloomed and intertwined over his cheeks in a lively display. He was speechless. This letter was written in English. No, not quite that. It was written in error-ridden Chinglish. Oh no. The grammar was entirely Chinese, and any word Shang Xinghua didn't know was replaced by its pinyin equivalent. Great master, airplane shooting towards the sky. Did you not consider? What if I can't understand your shit-tier English? After puzzling his way through the general gist of the thing, Shen Qingqiu directed some energy to his hand. The paper broke into fragments and fell to the floor like June's snow, exactly resembling his currently tumultuous mental state. As it turned out, it was he who had underestimated Great Master, airplane shooting towards the sky. For Peerless Cucumber's eyes only. Everything is set and the preparations are complete. This is the letter. Everything is set and the preparations are complete. The location has not changed. It's just there was a small mishap with the time. In order to make the Sun Moon Dew mushroom mature as soon as possible, I fixed up a little something to promote its maturation, but I accidentally overdid it. Right now, it's as mature as it will ever get, and it will rot in no more than a week. So I hope you can leave Wanhua Palace's water prison as soon as possible. Don't worry, it was only a bit of something like chemical fertilizer, so there shouldn't be any difference when you use the mushroom, probably. This wasn't just going off recipe. Did the concept of recipes even exist for this guy? He'd used chemical fertilizer to ripen that all-natural, unpolluted life form. Fertilizer! There shouldn't be any difference when you use it, was the sort of guarantee as trustworthy as the ones from used car salesmen. Gangi Shia looked around. Senior, are you done reading? If you are, please toss the letter into the lake to destroy it. Actually, yesterday, Lo Shixiang gave orders that no one but him was allowed to enter. I must leave as soon as possible so as to avoid being discovered and causing more complications. Shen Qingqiu grabbed Gangi Shia. Do me a favor. Gangi Shia responded, Go ahead and ask as long as I... Shen Qingqiu didn't wait for him to finish saying am able before he sincerely asked, Let me out. Gangi Shia was silent until he said, with difficulty, Senior, I really can't do that. I have a reason to insist, Shen Qingqiu said solemnly. I swear that I don't intend to flee from the trial. After finishing my affairs, I will return to the water prison of my own volition to await judgment. If you don't trust me, we can take a blood oath. One could not renege on a blood oath. But in truth, after seeing to these affairs, it wouldn't matter whether Shen Qingqiu returned to Wanhua Palace's water prison, so he was, in fact, running a scam. I certainly trust Senior, but wasn't detention in the water prison primarily your request? Gangi Shia said awkwardly. Exactly what could be so critical that you would absolutely have to leave? If you're willing to explain, I can report to the sect leaders and seniors participating in the investigation. Shen Qingqiu was having some second thoughts. Gangi Shia was a Wanhua Palace disciple, and abetting the escape of a prisoner would be no small sin on any head it lay upon. This is why I kind of secretly really want him to get out. I want Shen Qingqiu to get out, because that means he has to come back. Which means he has to face Lobinga for some kind of price. This was an upstanding youngster. Throwing him to the wolves would be rather unkind. Within this 7-day limit, there were bound to be more opportunities. Therefore, he changed his tone. Forget it. It wasn't anything serious. As he spoke, he struggled to collect all the paper fragments on the ground before tossing them into the lake to destroy the evidence. Because most of his body was bound by immortal binding cables, still, movement was immensely difficult. After he shifted a couple of times, the black robe slid off his body. Gangi Shia had originally bent down to help, but when he saw the black robe cast aside on the ground, he unintentionally looked up. His arms and legs went rigid at the sight. Shen Qingqiu looked at him in askance. The white garment on his body had been ripped clean from his shoulder. It was obvious at a glance that someone had violently torn it apart with their bare hands. In addition, fragments of fabric that looked like they had been shredded by a whip had been left hanging from what remained. More than a few pale red scrapes were evident on the fair skin exposed by the damage. If one looked closely, they could also detect the faint traces of bruises on his neck that had yet to fade. Gangi Shia received a devastating shock to his worldview. Senior, are you sure you're all right? He asked in a trembling voice. No wonder Lobinga had forbidden anyone but him from entering the water prison, even if they had the authorization pass. why he had even confiscated Peak Lord Shang's application. So it's like this, an insubordinate disciple, devoid of conscience, worse than a beast. Gangi Shia inwardly cried tears of blood for Senior Shen. As for himself, Shen Qingqiu said blankly, "Yes, I'm all right." Gangi Shia was shaken. How could Senior Shen have such a tranquil expression, even in a moment like this? Shen Qingqiu finished tossing all the paper fragments into the lake. "You shouldn't take the words I said just now to heart. You..." Gangi Shia suddenly stood up, turned around, and left. Shen Qingqiu's face filled with black lines. "I say you shouldn't take it to heart and you just up and leave? Isn't that a bit too brusque?" But before an hour had passed, Gangi Shia returned again, carrying something in his hand. He walked over to Shen Qingqiu, unwrapped the seals binding that object, and slashed downward. With a white flash, the bindings surrounding Qingqiu's body abruptly loosened, and it felt like an electric circuit had been reconnected. He stretched his fingers. His spiritual energy was unmistakably back in operation and flowing smoothly. When he'd been imprisoned, he had been in the middle of a random, without-a-cure flare-up, but after 2 days of being tied up by the immortal binding cables, the poison had unexpectedly been suppressed. Suppressed again. This is a little chronic cough that I have. That has been fine. The poison had unexpectedly been suppressed again. Was this following the same principle as fighting fire with fire, or how two negatives make a positive? The immortal binding cables fell to the ground in pieces. Gangi Shia tossed over the object in his hands, and Shen Qingqiu reached out to catch it. "Shuya!" Holding the sword, Shen Qingqiu was overjoyed and astonished. He looked over at Gangi Shia. "I thought this was supposed to be with the old palace master." "Even if I risk being punished by my master, this junior cannot sit back and remain stoic while senior is disgraced," Gangi Shia said righteously. "I trust you, Senior Shen. Please follow me." Shen Qingqiu was involuntarily overcome by a sense of helplessness. "What's this? I keep feeling like he seems to have misunderstood something very important. But forget it, this is fine." "All right," Shen Qingqiu said resolutely. Sure, the heavenly demon blood was still dormant within his body, and wherever he ran, Lobinga would always be able to locate him, but that knowledge didn't matter so long as Lobinga couldn't chase him there. "Senior, can you walk?" Gangi Shia asked, deeply worried. "Do you need me to carry?" With a dark expression, Shen Qingqiu took a decisive stride and marched forward, using this action to prove that he could indeed walk, and walk very briskly at that. Gangi Shia started, then promptly followed close behind. Unexpectedly, when they stepped off the surface of the stone platform and onto the path, the water curtain that had been raised rumbled overhead and water gushed down. Shen Qingqiu, who'd been running quickly, also braked quickly, lest he take the spray head on. He stepped back onto the stone platform along with Gangi Shia, and the water curtain gradually stopped. It was basically deliberately stopping them from leaving. Wasn't this design a bit too intelligent? Gangi Shia suddenly understood. "I forgot. Once the water prison has been activated, there must always be someone on the stone platform. If this person leaves or there isn't enough weight on the platform, the water curtain automatically reactivates, even if the mechanism has been shut off." There's an extra word there. In the past, he'd never had any experiences with helping a prisoner escape, so naturally he hadn't remembered this. "In other words, one person has to be left on the stone platform before the others can leave?" Shen Qingqiu asked. Gangi Shia nodded. "Then you stay here." Gangi Shia was silent. Shen Qingqiu shook out his sleeves and headed toward the path. Behind him, Gangi Shia weakly raised his hand. "Senior Shen, even though I am most willing to serve, if you don't have me to lead the way, I'm afraid you won't be able to get out." Shen Qingqiu looked back and added, "Wait for me to return." Gangi Shia stood in place, stupefied. He had a mind to follow, but he was hindered by the fact that he had no way to leave the stone platform, so he could only stand there and wait. A short while later, he heard a muffled sound from outside, and Shen Qingqiu walked back up, dragging a person by the back of their collar. Shen Qingqiu hauled the still unconscious pock-faced disciple onto the stone platform, patted Gangi Shia on the shoulder, and said, "I happened to see this one on patrol and borrowed him for a bit. Let's go." In reality, he hadn't just happened to see him. There had been 4 people on patrol. Shen Qingqiu had secretly hidden himself, and only after careful selection had he grabbed this mouthy fellow. Just now it had also occurred to Gangi Shia to grab a random disciple to use as a weight, but the idea had flashed by only indistinctly. Now that Shen Qingqiu had done it himself, meaning there was no need for Gangi Shia to personally knock out a fellow disciple, he breathed a sigh of relief. As they were once more headed toward the outside, shoulder to shoulder, he saw Shen Qingqiu draw that black robe draped around his shoulders tighter, and a lump welled in his throat. He could only feel agonized. He was already reluctant to see Shen Qingqiu, the leader of a peak, be imprisoned and humiliated, yet now Shen Qingqiu needed to depend on a piece of clothing from the one who'd assaulted him to cover his body and conceal the marks of that humiliation. How could he not lament in distress? Shen Qingqiu saw Gangi Shiao's expression flicker. It looked like sympathy, but also indignation. He could only face turbulence with tranquility, and he kept his expression blank. Out of nowhere, Gangi Shia said, "Senior, please take it off." Shen Qingqiu stared. Huh? Without waiting for him to recover, Gangi Shia had already begun taking off his own outer robe. Shen Qingqiu was just considering whether he should toss a spiritual blast at Gangi Shia to try and return him to his senses, when Gangi Shia offered him the outer robe he'd removed with both hands. "Please wear this." Shen Qingqiu suddenly understood. Oh, so that was what he meant. Lo Binga's clothes were black, but the clothes themselves matched the person. Like the male lead himself, they were sophisticated, luxurious, yet understated. Obviously, Gangi Shia disapproved. Wearing such a robe would only draw attention. But changing into a white robe that looked like it could belong to anybody would be more advantageous to their chances of escape. Such attention to detail. Shen Qingqiu resolutely removed Lo Binga's robe and changed into Gangi Shiao's. Before leaving, he thought for a moment, then took the time to fold Lo Binga's robe. Only after this did he place it on the ground. Navigation wasn't particularly difficult upon first leaving the water prison, but the further they walked, the more Shen Qingqiu came to appreciate that Huanhua Palace's maze array was indeed exceptionally terrifying. They traveled through cave after cave, path intersecting with path, and every couple of steps they'd circle around and around, to the point it made his head spin. Despite walking so close to Gangi Shiao's back, Shen Qingqiu almost lost him quite a few times. If Gangi Shia hadn't known the assignments and schedules of the water prison staff like the back of his hand, who knew how many disciple guard patrols they would have run into? After an hour, they finally made it out of the underground water prison. They walked many kilometers more without stopping and entered Bailu Forest until they were about to cross the border of Huanhua Palace's territory. I am so excited that he got out. I could not be happier about this. The water prison's alarm had yet to sound, meaning that no one had yet discovered that the prisoner was gone. Lo Binga's order forbidding all others from visiting the water prison had inadvertently greatly aided Shen Qingqiu's escape. After a short rest, Shen Qingqiu said, "Young Master Gangi, after this point, you needn't stay to send me off. Hurry back now while we're still undetected." After a pause, he added, "Within 7 days, go to Huayue City. You'll definitely find me there." "If that's the case, I won't accompany you any further," Gangi Shia said. "Even though I don't know what Senior intends to do about these future concerns, please be careful. And Senior, please don't worry about the sex trial next month. It's as you said, those cleaned will remain clean no matter what. The sect leaders will obviously exonerate you." Unable to help himself, Shen Qingqiu laughed. First, his dark history was set in stone and couldn't be erased. Second, the trial next month had fuck all to do with him. He immediately cupped his hands, carefree and satisfied. "May we meet again." The road from Huanhua Palace's border to Huayue City ran through the most densely populated and economically developed stretch of the Central Plains. This also meant that an especially large number of secular cultivation sects and influential families were located within the area. The cultivators of this world highly valued aerial defense. Like in Jinlan City, they often set up aerial defense barriers over their territories. If an immortal sword or spiritual artifact flew through it above the speed limit, it would undoubtedly be discovered and reported to that sect's higher-ups. Obviously, traveling in this way would be like bombastically broadcasting his escape trajectory via megaphone. Shen Qingqiu flew part of the way and walked another without rest until he finally arrived at Huayue City the following night. His arrival timing was terribly unfortunate, as a festival celebrating the establishment of Huayue City was in full swing. The city was adorned with colored lanterns and would be brightly lit the entire night. Soaring dragons and lion dances filled the streets, and the drums and music thunderous. People were packed together, vendor next to vendor, peddlers shouldering their poles as they slunk down every street. Practically everyone had poured out of their homes. Even more unfortunate was that, on his arrival, dark clouds covered the moon. Without the support of sun or moonlight, the chance his plan would fail greatly increased. Anxious about the odds, Shen Qingqiu decided to wait for the time being. At most 1 day. If after that day the clouds had yet to disperse, he couldn't afford to care anymore. If the chance of failure remained greater, so be it. A risk would still be better than clinging to an overripe sun-moon dew mushroom and crying about it. At that point, even if it was cooked and served with alcohol, it would just reek of fertilizer. As Shen Qingqiu walked cautiously, he occasionally bumped into rowdy children or brushed past groups of laughing girls, and he felt, very slightly, that it really was a pity. If he weren't currently fleeing for his life, he would have liked to take a thorough tour of the city. Suddenly, several men, all dressed in clothes of the same color, were walking toward him, long swords slung over their backs. Each one held his head high and chest out. From a glance, one could tell they were arrogant disciples from a random sect. Though it sounded strange, the smaller and more random the sect, the more afraid their disciples would be that others didn't know they were cultivators. If they could have gotten away with it, they would have emblazoned their clothes with huge slogans. Shen Qingqiu turned his body in a natural manner and smoothly picked up a demon mask from the side. He placed it over his face, then openly and confidently walked toward them. At the festival, 6 out of 10 attendees were wearing masks. If he mixed in with them, he didn't have to fear drawing attention. Shixiang, would that Shuya sword really sit around in this city waiting to be captured? One man from the group asked. The 4 sects sent out the warrant for his capture as one. How could it be fake? The leader berated him. Didn't you see how many sects have sent people here to box them in? Keep an eye out. You saw Huanhua Palace's bounty, too. Don't you want it? Myriad thoughts filled Shen Qingqiu's mind. It turned out that without his knowledge, he'd become a wanted criminal. It's no wonder Huanhua Palace put down such a large sum. What happened to them was really just awful. The most I did to them was knock out an insignificant disciple, Shen Qingqiu thought. I didn't do anything else, so how did Huanhua Palace suddenly become the tragic victim? He wanted to keep listening, but they pulled farther and farther ahead, and the rush of people cut him off, so he could only give up. While he was mulling over whether he should find an abandoned residence to rest, he felt a sudden weight upon his leg. When he looked down, he saw a small child clinging to his thigh. That child unhurriedly raised his head. His face was pallid, like he was malnourished, but his eyes were both large and bright. They stared straight at Shen Qingqiu as the boy clung to his thigh, unwilling to let go. Shen Qingqiu patted his head. Who's your family? Did you get lost? The small child nodded, and when he spoke, his voice was meek and sweet. I got lost. The child's appearance was naturally endearing, and it even seemed a little familiar, so Shen Qingqiu leaned over to pick him up, letting him sit on his arm. Who did you come here with? The child clung to his neck and pursed his lips. With Shizun. Uh-huh. Was he some sect's young disciple? Then if a grown-up came to look for him, Shen Qingqiu was in for a real headache. But for some reason, the forlorn way the boy said Shizun stirred Shen Qingqiu's pity down to the core. He just couldn't harden his heart and toss the child to the side of the road, leaving him to continue huddling miserably. He patted the boy's soft little behind. Your Shizun didn't look after you properly. How incredibly awful of him. Where did you get lost? Do you remember? The child giggled into his ear. I remember. Shizun personally threw me down himself. So how could I not? Half of Shen Qingqiu's body went utterly cold. It was as if what he held in his arms wasn't the body of a young child, but a poisonous snake, a massive snake that had wound around his neck and bared its fangs, poised to bite and inject venom into him at any moment. We'll sit with that image for a second. He abruptly threw aside the person in his arms and turned around, his back covered in goosebumps. The fine hairs all over his body promptly stood straight up. The entire street was looking at him. The ones wearing masks, the ones not wearing masks. It was like they were suddenly all immobilized, holding their breaths and watching him. The ones wearing masks were frightening, with their sinister and demonic visages. But the one not wearing masks were even more panic-inducing. They didn't have faces. I'm sorry, what? Shen Qingqiu's instinct in that second was to place his hand on Xu Ya, but he shortly caught himself. He couldn't attack. This was what he'd once taught Lo Bing'e, while within Meng Mo's barrier. To attack the people who appeared in the dream realm was to in fact attack your own self. Cold sweat dripped from Shen Qingqiu's forehead. He had wholly, completely failed to realize that he'd entered this barrier. To be fair, people never remembered when and how exactly a dream began. But he'd been fleeing. Surely he hadn't been so dull-witted as to fall asleep on the side of the road while running for his life. From behind him there came a tender voice. Shizun. Moments ago, when this voice had been by his ear, it had sounded clearly and utterly adorable and innocent, but when he listened to it now, it actually possessed some unspeakably terrifying quality. Why don't you want me anymore? The child form of Lo Bing'e asked faintly from where he stood behind Shen Qingqiu. Shen Qingqiu decisively refused to turn his head and immediately took off. Though he said that all these faceless people were watching him, no, he couldn't call it watching because they didn't even have eyes, but their faces still turned in Shen Qingqiu's direction, and he could indeed feel the weight of countless gazes upon him. Shen Qingqiu pretended he couldn't see any of this and charged straight ahead, thrusting aside anyone in his way. Suddenly, a hand intercepted his palm. He turned his head to look. Though his hand was slim, it possessed terrifying strength, basically like an iron shackle. A 14-year-old Lo Bing'e firmly gripped his wrist. On his face was not only the bruising that had never been allowed to heal, but an overflowing melancholy. Those pitch-black eyes stared right at him, almost within reach. "You're still coming?" Shen Qingqiu tried 3 times before he finally flung off Lo Bing'e, then pushed aside the crowd and continued to flee. First was a child, second was a youth. If the adult version came next, he really wouldn't be able to take it. Maybe not right now, but give you a few minutes. You'd be able. But this street seemed to go on forever with no end in sight. After a sequence of small stalls on either side, faceless playing children and demon-masked girls appeared a second time. Shen Qingqiu was finally certain. This dream realm street was looping. Going forward was fruitless. Since neither forward nor backward would work, he'd blaze a different trail. Shen Qingqiu looked left and right, then darted up to a liquor shop. Crimson lanterns hung high over the shop's doors, the red glow muted and beautiful, yet the wooden doors were tightly shut. Shen Qingqiu pulled open the doors and had just walked inside when they slammed closed by themselves. The interior of the house was dark, and a cold breeze blew through it. Rather than being the inside of a liquor shop, it felt more like he'd entered a cave. Shen Qingqiu didn't think this unexpected. Dream realms couldn't be understood using common sense. Every door had the potential to lead anywhere. At this moment, a series of eerie noises drifted to his ear. They sounded like the intensely labored, incessant panting of a person close to death, whose lungs had been punctured, who was in terrible agony. Moreover, it didn't sound like only one person. Shen Qingqiu snapped his fingers, flicking a flame forth from his fingertips, and aimed it toward the origin of those strange noises. That was nice alliteration. Flicking a flame forth from his fingertips? That was nice. The flame illuminated the scene in its entirety, leaving out not a single detail. His pupils instantly shrank to pinpoints. Lu Qingge held Cheng Luan, the blade aimed at himself, and was stabbing it into his own chest. His body was stained with blood, large swaths covered with a deep and ghastly red. The wounds weren't just concentrated in one place, and a stream of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. It looked like he'd already stabbed himself with the sword, who knew how many times, yet his expression was both furious and crazed. It was obvious he was delirious, in the midst of a chi deviation. Beneath the rays of dim yellow firelight, this picture was exceptionally horrifying. Shenqingqiu momentarily forgot that this was still the dream realm and threw himself forward, wrenching Chengluan away. The sword that had been staked in the center of Lu Qingge's heart, and with only a light touch from Shenqingqiu, fresh blood spurted violently forth, filling his vision with red. At that, Shenqingqiu's mind cleared a little, and he backed up 2 steps, only to bump into another person. He jerked his head around. Yue Qingyuan's head was lowered, gaze meeting his. Though their gazes met, those 2 eyes were empty and devoid of light. From his throat to his chest, his 4 limbs and abdomen were all pierced with a forest of pitch-black arrows. Pierced with 10,000 arrows. All at once, Shenqingqiu understood the meaning of these visions. These were their original deaths. The deaths that he had been meant to cause with his own hands. Shenqingqiu couldn't stand it anymore. He far preferred being outside, getting aggressively stared down by a circle of faceless people, to this sort of thing. He backed up in the direction from which he'd come, and he managed to brush those wooden doors. Feeling as if he'd been granted amnesty, Shenqingqiu kicked the doors open and rushed outside. His mind was a mess, his footsteps confused as he tripped and staggered along, cutting a rather sorry figure. Every person on the street watched him in a deathly silence, and while he was disoriented, he crashed headlong into someone's chest. That person's hand swiftly came around to his back, gathering him into their arms. The other party was a little taller than him, slender and willowy, dressed in clothes as black as ink that exposed only a fair neck. Above that, a sinister mask covered their face. Shenqingqiu hadn't yet spoken when a smiling voice came from above. "Shizun, be careful." He had no need to lift the mask to know whose face lay underneath. At once, Shenqingqiu began to struggle. The other party didn't hold him by force, so getting free wasn't difficult. Only after retreating several steps and maintaining a safe distance did he right himself. "You created this city?" Shenqingqiu asked. Lo Binghe casually removed the mask. His expression looked like he was sad that they couldn't keep playing hide-and-seek. "Correct. What does Shizun think?" Shenqingqiu slowly nodded. "You truly deserve to be called Meng Mo's succeeding disciple." To be able to create an illusion this detailed, he feared it was nearly as good as the city Meng Mo had created to trap them in all those years ago. Furthermore, it had so accurately grasped his lurking fears. Originally, Lo Binghe's mood had seemed rather good, but on hearing these words, the smile on his lips faded. "I'm not Meng Mo's disciple." "Didn't you accept him as your master?" Shenqingqiu asked, slightly curious. Like he would ever. Lo Binghe held his silence for a while before he answered in a peeved tone. "I didn't." "All right, then. If he didn't, he didn't." Shenqingqiu didn't think there was any point wasting time on this. "Shizun, if you're willing to return of your own volition, you can ask for anything," Lo Binghe said. "Are you offering a plea bargain?" asked Shenqingqiu. "So long as I don't dissolve the blood mites within your body, it will be futile to flee." "Oh, is that so?" he smiled. "Then right now, why haven't you personally come to catch me?" Lo Binghe stiffened, sparks flashing in his eyes. At this reaction, Shenqingqiu became even more sure. "Something has gone wrong with that sword of yours, right?" he asked languidly. "The heavens smile down on me. After falling into the endless abyss, while within the stomach of a huge ancient beast, Lo Binghe had found a mythical sword that had been forged by a master demon blacksmith with an entire lifetime's worth of painstaking labor. That sounds like another sword. Similar to another sword. Found in another beast. In another story. This sword was called Shinmo, Heart Demon. The name alone tells you that it's something super dangerous, right? And that was a must. The stronger the spiritual artifact, the harder it was to control. Since ancient times, Shinmo had passed through the hands of more than 100 masters, and all had been blessed geniuses from various races. Yet despite this, none of them had been able to escape the same fate, and they had all died to this very blade, their own sword. Shinmo lashed back against its wielder. A cursed item! If you could make it submit, it was a formidable weapon in your hand. But if one day you were unable to control the sword's evil tendencies, you would become no more than another blood sacrifice to its hunger. That's a really great idea for a cursed weapon in D&D, actually. Hang on. Page 126 in the middle. I could do something with that. Only after starting the Demon Realm arc had the original Lobinga gone through his first bout of internal struggles, wherein he narrowly escaped Shinmo's recoil. After that, for the sake of solving this problem, he'd begun a side plot that lasted 500 chapters and involved collecting 8 or 9 more girls. But right now, with the plot in disarray, it seemed the recoil incident had also moved earlier. Shinmo's recoil was no joke. No wonder Lobinga hadn't given chase. He was busy secluding himself to recover, so he was unable to come capture Shen Qingqiu in person. Suddenly, Lobinga grabbed Shen Qingqiu's shoulder and forcefully yanked. Rip. Why again? Lobinga's face was almost as dark as the bottom of a pot. Each word he spat out sounded like he'd first ground it between his teeth. Even if I can't come in person for now, Shizune shouldn't be too happy. That doesn't mean you should tear my clothes. Shen Qingqiu clutched the remaining fabric tightly and indignantly said, What are you doing? Is this your only method of humiliating others? It was clearly Shizune who humiliated me first. Satisfaction points plus 50. You can add points for that too? Gross, why does this feel so sick? I need a moment. When Lobinga's hand exerted force, the white robe's fabric disintegrated into pieces, drifting away in the wind. I am sensing a pattern. His anger still unappeased, he pressed toward Shen Qingqiu. His expression made Shen Qingqiu fear that there would be no end to this. He'd never known Lobinga to have crazy clothes-ripping tendencies. But of course he couldn't just sit there and resign himself to it. They exchanged 10 or so blows, quick and nimble. Lobinga could obviously easily assume the upper hand. But like a cat playing with a mouse, he patiently engaged Shen Qingqiu in close combat. Shen Qingqiu's movements were swift, but it seemed that in Lobinga's eyes he was always one step behind. When he lashed out with a palm strike, Lobinga evaded within a hair's breadth every time, calm and unhurried. Then, as if reciprocating a polite gesture, he perfunctorily returned the blow. On top of that, the system was being extremely annoying, with satisfaction point notifications ringing without end, plus 20, plus 30, plus 50, etc. The infernal racket flooded Shen Qingqiu's brain. After several back and forths, it was Shen Qingqiu's turn to wear a dark face. Where are you aiming? Are you messing with me? Shouldn't the goal of a fight be defeating the other party? This wasn't a fight. This couldn't even be considered sparring. It was basically harassment. As he thought this, Shen Qingqiu's concentration slipped, and he used too much force, falling into Lobinga. This, Lobinga didn't evade at all, and he let Shen Qingqiu crash into his arms with a thud. His voice carried laughter, like his moon had risen once more. Shizune taught me this maneuver himself. When it comes to force, there's a time for restraint and a time for release, and one must above all else avoid losing one's balance. How could you forget that yourself? At this moment, Shen Qingqiu's mind was bombarded with a colorful explosion of little beast ad nauseum. Motherfucker, this maneuver really was something he taught Lobinga. He still remembered that lesson, not long after Lobinga had moved out of the woodshed, though he was blessed with shitloads of raw talent and had come up with a fighting style through random experimentation. Other than the handful of cutting and stabbing maneuvers every new disciple knew, he'd known absolutely jack shit about any higher level techniques. After watching him practice a series of sword, palm, and foot techniques, Shenqing Cho had held his forehead for a long time, while Lo Bing awaited his evaluation by his side, as anxious as he was nervous. Shenqing Cho had been unable to bear hurting him, and after a long while, had finally squeezed out a single line, pragmatic and quite flexible. In the name of correcting Lo Bing's more tragic habits, Shenqing Cho had put in a great deal of painstaking effort and given him daily private instruction. He had been unable to understand why a nudge wasn't enough. Given Lo Bing's intelligence and comprehension, Shenqing Cho shouldn't have needed to tell him anything more than once. But in reality, Lo Bing was incredibly stubborn. He would immediately forget his lessons, no matter how tirelessly taught, and always use too much force. He had slammed into Shenqing Cho's arms who knew how many times. Until Shenqing Cho finally became angry. Are you doing this on purpose? He's so close sometimes. Unable to help himself, he had slapped the back of Lo Bing's head, neither heavy nor light, and shouted, "How is this anticipating and defending against your enemy? You're basically throwing yourself into their arms." He gets close sometimes. Only after this did Lo Bing, face fully flushed, finally start practicing in earnest. He no longer dared to make mistakes so carelessly. But in the present, Lo Bing was the one lecturing Shenqing Cho on his incorrect stance. What nonsense is this? Shenqing Cho felt like his dignity as a master had been challenged. He was about to counterattack when Lo Bing's hand trailed downward, following the line of his spine. Goosebumps exploded down Shenqing Cho's back in its wake. "Lo Bing," he said through clenched teeth. "Satisfaction points plus 100. Congratulations." Congratulations, my ass. We will be congratulating your ass at some point. I'm fairly certain. Lo Bing again plucked away the length of a shredded white cloth. "Seeing Shizun in this robe makes me awfully unhappy. It would be better to rip it all off." "Doesn't that mean he won't stop until I'm 100% naked?" "Even if you hate me, there's no need to take it out on this robe," Shenqing Cho said. "Moreover, it's Gangi Shiao's." Lo Bing's face fell. Shizun's the one who truly hates me. You're unwilling to associate with even a scrap of my clothing." Why? Why were two grown men neurotically discussing a piece of clothing while surrounded by staring eyes? "Lo Bing, are you actually the sensitive type? I even patted your robe clean and folded it for you. What more do you want? It can't be that you wanted me to hand wash and return it to you personally," Shenqing Cho thought, his expression shifting erratically. "What is Shizun thinking?" Lo Bing asked at the sight. He added coolly, "If it's about Gangi Shia, let me advise Shizun. You needn't think about him anymore." "Oh, don't hurt the baby." "Don't hurt the baby?" An ominous feeling rose in Shenqing Cho's heart, and he asked in a forceful voice, "What happened to Gangi Shia?" Plot-wise, Gangi Shia being banished, forced to defend a desolate regional border and deprived of any future prospects, was only supposed to happen after Lo Bing and the little palace mistress slept together. But now the plot was jumbled to the point where even airplanes shooting towards the sky, the story's own father, would no longer recognize it, so naturally any scenario could have moved up. Shenqing Cho had yet to hear Lo Bing's answer when the faceless people nearby stirred. Originally, they had only vacantly stood there, watching blankly as if they were mentally infirm or doing their own thing. Now they started to steadily gather around him. Shenqing Cho was squeezed into the center of the crowd, but he couldn't directly blast them away. He looked again toward Lo Bing, whose brows were tightly furrowed, hand pressed to his temple, too preoccupied to notice anything else, as if he were enduring a mental assault. Shenqing Cho had a sudden epiphany. In all likelihood, Shinmo had taken the chance to lash out and was trying to strike at Lo Bing's mind. As Lo Bing could no longer spare the energy to maintain the barrier, the dream realm was beginning to fall into chaos. If Shenqing Cho didn't leave now, then when would he get the chance? If Lo Bing couldn't expend any attention to stop him, so If Lo Binga couldn't expend any attention to stop him, so as long as Shen Qingqiu faced another illusion and overcame the related fears buried within his heart, he would be able to destroy this failing barrier. Just like that, Shen Qingqiu left. Lo Binga's head hurt like it was splitting open, but he was unable to move. He could only yell, "I dare you to take another step." Shen Qingqiu took 10 steps. Afterward, he turned his head. "How's that?" Lo Binga looked like he was about to cough up blood. He ground out each word one by one. "You just wait and see." Shen Qingqiu's gaze didn't falter. He spoke coldly and loftily. "Goodbye." "Oh, we've got art. You think I'll wait just because you told me to? I'm not an idiot." To the side, Shen Qingqiu glimpsed another shop. He kicked open the doors and leapt through them. Whatever appeared this time, he was absolutely certain he could face it calmly. At the very least, his chance of success was higher than when facing Lo Binga. The doors closed behind him, and it was like the clamor outside had been severed away by a sharp knife. Within a split second, it was all deathly quiet. Shen Qingqiu held his breath and waited, soundless. After a long while, it was as if someone had lit a candle, and his surroundings slowly, flickeringly lightened. Shen Qingqiu looked down, and he came face to face with a countenance that was both foreign and familiar. Before him knelt a frail-looking youth. The boy wore coarse clothes and was crouched bent over on the ground. It was a crestfallen pose, and his hands were tightly tied with thick, rough rope. Though his face was deathly pale, his eyes were full of life. Shen Qingqiu met his gaze, unwavering. This categorically wasn't Shen Qingqiu's memory, but this face was indeed exactly like his. The only thing it was missing was the polish of time and cultivation. Instead, it possessed the inexperience of youth. This was Shen Qingqiu, yet it wasn't Shen Qingqiu. If he had to be obvious about it, it was Shen Zhu. Shen Qingqiu abruptly sat up on a wooden slab. After startling awake, he took in his surroundings, and only then did he realize that he was lying within an abandoned residence. We have art of this crouching. That was the wrong window. Hang on. That was the wrong window. There we go. Art of the crouching. That's ominous as hell, actually. We only get a glimpse of that before he wakes up. That's suspicious. That's sus. You know. What was that about? The sky was already bright. White light streaming through the worn-out windows and cracks in the rice paper. Then he remembered. The night before, he'd wandered at random through the festival, and not long into his wander had really found an old, uninhabited house. He'd originally only intended to rest a little, but by accident he had carelessly fallen asleep, allowing Lo Binga to catch him within the dream realm. As Shen Qingqiu considered the illusion he'd seen just before the dream realm collapsed, he couldn't help but sink into thought. Though his and the original flavor's souls counted as two different people, in the end he was using someone else's body, so it made sense that there would be at least some influence from the prior owner. What he'd seen in the dream had likely been the original Shen Zhu's childhood memories. In a way, then, he had cheated his way out, because those memories had absolutely no hold on the current Shen Qingqiu. Thus, he had been able to easily and effortlessly break free of them. Although in retrospect, Shen Qingqiu thought this fairly suspicious. The Shen Zhu within his dream had been tied up, so he'd assumed it was a memory from the time when Shen Zhu was still held by human traffickers. However, he'd been in a room decorated with a soft carpet, numerous cabinets for keeping valuables, and the walls hung with calligraphy, which had lent it a noble air. It hadn't looked like a criminal's den, but rather had unquestionably been a rich man's study. In other words, it looked like Shen Zhu had not been as doted upon as the Chou estate, as doted upon at the Chou estate as Chou Haiteng claimed. Shen Qingqiu hopped up from the bare wooden couch and unconsciously felt up his form. At least all his clothes were still there. But even though his clothes were intact, he didn't really want to wear them anymore. Though they were on his body, he had an ominous feeling that they could be ripped off at any moment. There isn't a scene break, but it is a new scene. There is a space for the page, so just taking a second to absorb that. Before he'd gone too far through the streets, Shen Qingqiu discovered that more than a few people had poured into Huayue City upon receiving notice of the warrant for his capture. Though many of the cultivators put on an act and didn't wear their sect colors while disguised as common people, when they sat down at roadside stands, their postures were entirely different from an ordinary person's. Shen Qingqiu felt it was too dangerous to go as he was, so he found a corner, smeared his face with dirt, and haphazardly stuck on some whiskers. After making all these preparations, he carefully returned to the street. When he glanced up at the sky, he saw that the clouds were thin, like they were slowly retreating. If nothing went awry, noon today would be the optimal time. When he looked down again, a slender snow-white silhouette flashed through the crowd in front of him, fast and light, their profile outstandingly handsome. Luchinga, his hired thug, was here. Shen Qingqiu's eyes brightened, but just as he was about to chase after Luchinga, a delicate shout erupted from a nearby tavern. "What are you saying with your filthy mouth?" This voice was clear, delicate, and extremely familiar. Shen Qingqiu unconsciously paused mid-step, the scene drawing his gaze. Right afterward, a sequence of crashes shook the air, and all the passers-by cast glances as well. At this time, another young woman humphed and said spitefully, "What, you have the guts for crime, but won't let others talk? No wonder Sangcheng Mountain produced a degenerate like Shen Qingqiu. Everyone in the sect must be eager to bury their shame, especially Qingjing Peak. Unfortunately for you, everyone knows what kind of thing he is. You think you can hide it?" What a venomous tone. The young woman who'd spoken first jumped in to refute her right away. "Shizun absolutely isn't the kind of person who'd do something like this. Don't you dare slander him." What young girl would even now speak up for him like so? Who could it have been other than Ning Ying Ying? Ming Fan's voice carried into the street as well. "We were only polite to you out of respect for the old palace master. You ought to be more polite as well." Though Shen Qingqiu had wanted to go look for Lu Qingge, having urgent matters to tend to, this strange atmosphere made him hesitate for a second. In the end, afraid the Qingjing Peak disciples would be at a disadvantage, he stayed for a moment and ducked to the side of the building to hide and watch. There were two distinct camps in this tavern. One was led by Ming Fan and Ning Ying Ying, while a crowd of Qingjing Peak disciples stood behind them, their every face filled with displeasure. The little palace mistress stood in front of the other side, her hands on her hips as she faced her opponents with a cold scowl. The Huanhua Palace disciples behind her had already flashed their blades, their glares even more full of fury. Two young women, one lovely and delicate, the other with gorgeous features, gracefully faced off. Even if the air was filled with crackling, sizzling sparks, the scene was still incomparably easy on the eyes. Lo Bingge was setting fires in his backyard again. No, even Qingjing Peak's disciples were involved, and they had challenged Huanhua Palace. This was the real enemies meeting on a narrow road. That has a footnote. An idiom for when you unexpectedly meet your enemies or nemesis, approximately equivalent to the English, "It's a small world," but only for people you hate or who hate you. Shen Qingqiu could guarantee that if he left this scene and walked away right this instant, Qingjing Peak would definitely suffer more casualties, and greatly. Remember, this little palace mistress was domineering to the point that other than Lo Bingge, there was no one in the world she wouldn't dare hit. Injury and crippling strikes were common dishes on her menu of retaliation. The little palace mistress humphed. "Not that kind of person. Then tell me, why would he flee in fear of punishment? And he did that sort of thing." As she spoke, she clenched her teeth in hatred, the rims of her eyes going red. Shizun was never convicted. What do you mean, flee in fear of punishment? Ning Ying Ying shot back. And there's still no final consensus on who committed those deeds. Our Xiangcheng Mountain never blamed your Huanhua Palace for being gullible and overly suspicious, or for insisting on imprisoning our Changing Peak's lord... our Changing Peak's peak lord in your water prison without regard for the truth. If not for you, things wouldn't have blown up into this situation today. The reason for this... It must be, bitch, because it's censored. So the reason for this bitch fight, but it is censored, is beep fight, wasn't the male lead, but Shenqing Cho? Shenqing Cho wiped his brow. But what merit does this humble Shen... By what merit does this humble Shen deserve this? At the same time, the dark cloud over his heart that he'd been unable to wipe away grew even darker. This argument just made it more evident that after he left, something had happened at Huanhua Palace, and these new grudges and old debts had all fallen on his head. The little palace mistress flew into a rage, though to tell the truth, Shenqing Cho felt that she was always in a state of rage. So you're saying that our Huanhua Palace only has ourselves to blame? She snapped. Ah, Xiangchuan Mountain is so impressive, so high up and domineering, so arrogant and unbridled, that not only do you refuse to apologize, you have the gall to be so brazen toward the victims. With this kind of behavior, you still have the face to call yourselves the #1 major sect? Preposterous. Ning Ying Ying curled her lip. Xiangchuan Mountain has already been acknowledged by the masses as the #1 major sect. Whether you accept that fact doesn't matter. Moreover, who came at us first and acted brazen? Our Qingjing Peak was eating a perfectly peaceful meal in his tavern. What's your justification for coming up and cursing us out? First saying that you want our whole Qingjing Peak to kneel to you, kowtow, and apologize for our offenses, then saying that our entire Xiangcheng Mountain should be buried together. Exactly who was being preposterous? Huawei City is not your Huanhua Palace's backyard. Or are you saying that the entire world is your house? Somebody fucking, if anybody, I have a mic, but I can't drop it. My backup mic is back, I still can't drop it. Somebody in proximity to a microphone, please fucking drop it. Holy shit. She just moved up on my list. That was some queen shit. That was beautiful. Ning Ying Ying's voice was delicate and crisp, and Shenqing Cho was flabbergasted to hear it. How had the innocent, naive, and silly Ying Ying become so good at catfights? And why was the little palace mistress acting like a beast, not properly leashed in her cage, biting at everyone she laid eyes on? Our Qingjing Peak has always cleaved to etiquette, Ning Ying Ying continued. Shizun was a proper teacher, and said not to bicker with foul-mouthed little children. This is the only reason we've tolerated you thus far. Are you finished? If you are, then leave. Don't get in the way of our meal. I can't eat while looking at your face. Oh no, do I love her? Oh no, do I love her? Would I die for her? A bitch might. A bitch might. After she spoke, she picked up a cup of tea from the table and splashed it at the other girl's feet. I love her. I love her. Argue with the wall. I love her. She's amazing. 10 out of 10. An icon, a queen, a lifestyle. Never been done before. Amazing. Outstanding. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The little palace mistress didn't dodge fast enough, and a few drops of tea splashed the hem of her dress. You, she screeched, you shrew! Ming Feng couldn't take it anymore. Throwing aside his chopsticks, he sneered, Don't think we're afraid of you just because you're the old palace master's daughter. Did we know that? Did we know that? Had we learned that about her? I don't know. I don't know if it's new information or not, but it's technically new information to my brain, because if we found that we knew that about her, I'd forgotten that about her. Oops. After all, you're just a little girl relying on her daddy. Neither your seniority nor your cultivation are worth anything, though when it comes to your ability to annoy, you're first rate. Shrew, The way I see it, you're a bigger shrew than anyone else here. You've lost every shred of Huanhua Palace's face. Ming Fan ain't too bad either. Shen Qingqiu was shocked. Qingjing Peak's disciples had always been so meek in front of him, they wouldn't even dare fart. If he told them to feed the chickens, they dare not walk the dogs, too. If he told them to make rice, they dare not make congee. Yet it turned out they were actually quite the smack-talkers when let loose. The little palace mistress's face went white with anger. She'd heard Qin Yuanwei say that this soft, bewitching little girl had been sect siblings with Lo Bing-e for many years, as well as childhood friends and innocent playmates. All at once, envy and hatred flowed forth from her, and she suddenly raised her hand, a black shadow shooting out from her sleeve like a poisonous snake. Fuck, she has a new whip. Oh, shit. When the other customers in the tavern saw that it was finally coming to blows, they left at top speed. Although, as they passed Shen Qingqiu, their expressions were unperturbed, like this was nothing strange. It seemed that the residents of Huaihai City had long since grown accustomed to this sort of scene. The waiter even adeptly stuck a bill on the post before he walked out. The little palace mistress was the old palace master's beloved daughter. Her martial skills were the product of his hands-on teaching, and her weapons were far from ordinary in quality, the whip's strikes swift and fierce. Meanwhile, Ning Ying Ying was the beloved youngest Shimei who was pampered by the entirety of Qingjing Peak. She very rarely encountered danger and had virtually no real battle experience. Her sword waved back and forth, and though she warded off the attacks, a keen eye could see she was having trouble. For his part, Ming Fan wanted to aid her, but he couldn't get past the circle of the Iron Whip's dance and could only fret helplessly. Shen Qingqiu assessed the situation, then casually plucked a green leaf from the flower pot by his foot, which he sent flying. The fragile green leaf was filled with spiritual energy. When it collided with the iron whip, there was a piercing crash of something hard on metal. The little palace mistress was unable to see what had gone wrong, but she felt the space between her finger and thumb go numb before her whip slipped from her hand and flew away. Ning Ying Ying also started. She'd been about to meet another attack with her sword, but once she saw that the little palace mistress had no weapon with which to block, she hurriedly pulled back, afraid of really stabbing her. But the little palace mistress had no similar mercy, and her reaction was supremely fast. The second her weapon left her hand, she reversed the momentum of her arm to turn it into a slap. A smack. Ning Ying Ying held her face, her head turned to the side. Fuck. The 5 fingerprints standing out on Ning Ying Ying's face and the cheek, already swollen. The 5 fingerprints standing out on Ning Ying Ying's face and the cheek already swollen on one side went to show that the attack had been utterly ruthless. Shen Qingqiu's heart ached in terrible distress. You dare hit a disciple who even I've never touched? However, at the sight of Ning Ying Ying's pretty face made lopsided, one side swollen, one side smooth, and all over tremendously unsightly, the little palace mistress was enormously satisfied, and felt she had vented her resentment. She rubbed her wrist, raised her chin, and laughed. If Yoshizun won't teach you, then let this palace mistress do it. Lesson 1. One must consider propriety when speaking. Who the fuck are you, trying to teach my disciples in my place? Ming Fan drew his sword. You bitch! You've gone too far. Let's go all out. Ming Fan gonna throw hands. Ming Fan's like, you did not just strike a queen. Now I have to end your life. The Qingjing Peak disciples couldn't take it any longer. Their youngest Shimei had been hit. How could they just let that go? They yelled and drew their swords, their blades gleaming with dazzling light. Shen Qingqiu was trying to figure out how to teach the little palace mistress a lesson, without inciting greater bloodshed or exposing his location as quickly as possible, when he suddenly noticed that within the crowd of Huanhua Palace disciples, one person was behaving most strangely and suspiciously. Shen Qingqiu observed that person for a few seconds, after which his heart thumped. Not good, he thought silently. It would no longer be so easy to slip away. Shit. Okay, so that was the end of the chapter, by the way. Chapter 8 is called Death. Just so we're all aware. And about now is when I'm going to take that short little break where I just, get up, walk around, that kind of thing. A short little break to make sure that I've still got the blood flowing. What am I supposed to be doing? That was a kind of a cliffhanger to end all cliffhangers, but fortunately, just 5 minutes, not a long break at all, and we'll come back and we will apparently finish chapter 8. I did the math wrong earlier and thought nothing of going from chapter 7 to chapter 9. So we'll come back for chapter 8, Death, here in just a second. I'll be right back. Alrighty. Back to whatever the hell is supposed to happen. We were having like a perfectly good kind of brawl bad bitch moment, and then now all of a sudden chapter 8 is titled Death, so I don't know exactly how serious this is about to get, but if this is about to get like serious, I don't think I'm okay. Pardon me. Page 143, by the way, for chapter 8. Death. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, it's whatever. MXTX just straight up calling a chapter Death? Nothing to worry about. At first glance, this disciple looked rather ordinary. They were mixed in with the crowd of Huanhua Palace disciples, hunched over and huddling close, gaze flickering around. Shenxing Cho only noticed him because his face was one color, his neck another, and his hands yet two more different hues. I only noticed him because he's multicolored. Furthermore, within this agitated mob, where everyone's blood was running hot, he didn't draw his sword or cry out for a fight, nor did he glare at the offending party with furious eyes. Instead, he brushed back and forth through the Huanhua Palace disciples with his head down, looking just like a pickpocket taking advantage of the ruckus. As far as Shenxing Cho knew, only one type of person acted like this. While Mingfan was mid-clash, sword ringing and clanging, he looked back and cried, "Xiao Shimei! Shimei, how are you?" Ning Ying Ying had halted for a while, like the slap had stunned her silly. Now she finally came back to her senses. Her face was half red, half white, expression furious and eyes teary, but she brandished her sword to fight back. She'd suffered this humiliation because she'd been momentarily soft-hearted. This time, she would show no mercy whatsoever. Fucking get it! Get it! The shop's interior descended into a massive brawl. To the side, Shenxing Cho saw an old cat lazily curl its tail, licking its fur in the sunlight. He scooped it up with a single hand and tossed it into the tavern. Surprised, the old cat screeched and darted back and forth between the two fighting camps. Shenxing Cho lowered his head and followed it, slipping into the circle of battle. Once this strange person had mysteriously pushed into the fray, both sides paused. Afraid to harm an innocent, Ning Ying Ying hesitated slightly, but the little palace mistress didn't have such reservations. Picking her whip back up, she lashed out as before. Shenxing Cho chased the old cat back and forth through the hall, calling the name he'd given it on the spot. In the midst of this chaos, Ning Ying Ying's hands were obviously tied, especially as she was afraid to make a careless move. Yet she kept feeling as if someone was lifting her elbow, then like someone was pushing her shoulder. It was as if even when she didn't move her sword, it still danced, throwing off silvery light. Suddenly, two smacks rang out, and the little palace mistress held her face, dumbstruck and petrified like a wooden chicken, frozen on the spot. These two slaps had been much louder and sharper than the one she had delivered to Ning Ying Ying's face. Everyone in both camps had seen Ning Ying Ying's arms fly, slapping first with one hand and then the other, giving the little palace mistress two smacks in the face. In tacit agreement, they all stopped where they were. Ming Feng cheered. "Xiao Shimei, nice hit!" No, that actually wasn't me," Ning Ying Ying said weakly. "Don't be scared, it's already done," Ming Feng said encouragingly. "Everyone knows she started it. You were considerate enough not to hurt her, and she responded with a sneak attack. It serves her right." Ming Feng is like her biggest fan. I love that for her. As he should be. The crowd of Qingjing Peak disciples agreed, one after another. The little palace mistress's tears glistened. You dare to hit me? Not even my daddies ever hit me. No, it really wasn't me. It was you, Ming Feng cut in, scoffing. Remember, whenever Qingjing Peak's disciples are bullied, we must return it twofold. If we don't hit back, we'll betray all of Shizun's lessons. That is, more often than not, the correct response, by the way. If someone like this chick, like this palace mistress chick, Starts fucking giving you grief out of nowhere. Damn right you bite back. I don't really believe in turning the other cheek in certain circumstances. I really don't. I don't. So this is really right up my alley. I just talked myself right off the page. Shen Qingqiu internally cheered together with the disciples. Good boy Ming Fan had earnestly taken his teachings to heart. Yes, grudges must be repaid in just this way. Stealthily, Shen Qingqiu slipped into the group of Huanhua disciples and finally caught that old cat, which was still howling and screeching. Regardless of how stupid a person might be, they could still see that something was off with him. While cupping her two red, terribly cumbersome-looking swollen cheeks, the little palace mistress glared at him, filled with resentment. Hey, who exactly are you? Who would dare mess with me like this? The Huanhua palace disciples surrounded him, yelling, The palace mistress is asking you a question. Shen Qingqiu bent over and released the cat. Then he straightened and pointed to the disciple who stood hunched and lurking in the back. Instead, why don't you ask, who exactly is he? All at once, every one of those gazes focused on that person. The little palace mistress was still in a rage, so at first she only gave the indicated disciple a sideways glance. But the more she looked, the stranger she found him. Leaving Shen Qingqiu alone for now, she turned to the odd disciple and said suspiciously, Who are you? What are you doing dressed like that? Are you really from our Huanhua palace? Why have I never seen you before? The disciple mumbled, but couldn't manage a reply. The little palace mistress turned to her subordinates. What about you? Do you recognize him? Realizing things weren't looking good, the disciple made an eerie sound, which made everyone turn their blades on him. Don't get close, Shen Qingqiu warned with a raised voice. At the same time, he plucked another leaf, then flicked his wrist and sent it forth. This time, both Ning Ying and Ming Fan saw the way that the leaf flew, and they balked. Wow. Enveloped in a sword glare's glow, the leaf pierced through the air and sliced open the strange disciple's outer robes, cleaving through his clothes to reveal the skin underneath. At this, it was like everyone had seen a ghost, and they backed up several steps. Someone even farther, shrieking as they leapt straight out of the tavern. Scarlet-colored skin. Shit. That should have occurred to me. That really should have. It was in perfect accord with Shen Qingqiu's guess. To his knowledge, only one type of entity held themselves with that posture, a sower disguised as a normal person. Only the usually exposed parts of the sower's skin had been painted to resemble the hue of an ordinary person's, and so the sower's cover was blown on the spot. As such, it decided it had nothing to lose and rushed forth with a yell, eyes bloodshot. These disciples were young juniors, so most of them hadn't gone on the recent excursion to Jinlan City. Therefore, they had only heard of this monster and never seen it. Now that a real one had appeared before them, and one that was madly grabbing at whoever it saw at that, they were all scared senseless. When the sower threw itself toward a Qingjing Peak disciple, Shen Qingqiu flashed between them and planted a foot in the sower's chest, sending it flying through 2 tables and spewing fresh blood everywhere. He turned his head to yell at the group, Hurry up and leave! Instead, Ning Ying latched onto him, crying and laughing. Shizun, is it you, Shizun? No way, my face is covered in dirt and whiskers and you can still recognize me? Shen Qingqiu was very slightly moved. However, in this kind of situation, choosing not to leave and on top of that, staying behind to be a burden, and moreover, calling out his true identity despite his disguise, as expected, she was still dumb. When the sower tenaciously threw itself toward them again, refusing to relent, Shen Qingqiu pushed Ning Ying away with a hand as gentle as spring. Then with the other hand, as harsh as winter, he flicked a fire technique at the enemy. It didn't hit. No, the fire didn't even come out. The fountain of blood that had remained dormant and hidden in Shen Qingqiu's throat for many years once more began to stir. He'd had enough of this without a cure, the poison that just loved dropping the ball at key moments. He snapped his fingers continuously over and over, but not a single flame sprang forth. Like a lighter out of lighter fluid, he clicked away, but there were no sparks no matter how he snapped. While Shen Qingqiu became flustered, the sower lunged and latched onto his thigh. Shen Qingqiu was struck speechless. He unthinkingly raised his misfortune-plagued right hand. Naturally, he could already detect 3 red patches happily taking root and growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not fair. Why am I infected so fast every time? Perhaps his rage and sorrow alchemized into a fuse, because with his last snap, an explosive burst of flames finally ignited between his fingers. With a kick, Shenxingqiu sent the sower clinging to his thigh flying, and he struck down over the palm, alight with raging flames. The sower was engulfed in a blaze of fire and a series of horrible shrieks. Ning Ying Ying and Mingfan tearfully sandwiched Shenxingqiu on his left and right. Shizun! They are cute. They're cute. That's all there is to it. They're cute. The other Qingjing Peak disciples were about to join in, but they quickly retreated under their Shizun's go outside and run 500 laps glare. Since his disguise was already awash, Shenxingqiu scrubbed and wiped at his face until he recovered his original appearance. Was anyone infected? He asked. Then, with a heartfelt tone, he finally said a line he'd always dreamed of saying. Hurry and take some medicine. You must not stop taking your medication. There's a footnote with that. You must not stop taking your medication originated as a slogan to encourage people with depression to not stop taking their medication. The phrase was later co-opted as internet slang as a way to say there's something wrong with you. I get that. I get that evolution anyway. Wait, what am I doing? Turn this over. Hello. Okay. One male and one female voice, one high and one low, sobbed into his ears. Shizun, we finally found you. Shizun, this disciple missed you so much it hurt. Shenxingqiu hadn't even replied when a cold feeling lanced down his back. He pushed aside 2 disciples and sent Shuya flying from the folds of his robes. With a clang, his blade blocked the little palace mistress's refined iron whip. If the little palace mistress could have been considered only temporarily enraged during the recent altercation with Qingjing Peak, then this time her actions truly brimmed with killing intent. She hacked away with the short whip in her hand like it was a knife or an axe, every move vicious and desperate. Are you mad? Shenxingqiu asked bluntly. Where does all this rage come from every day? He'd long wanted to ask that question. You wicked villain, the little palace mistress shouted. Return the lives of my Xixiang and Shiji. At first, Shenxingqiu thought she was once again grieving the Huanhua disciples who died during the Immortal Alliance conference. He would never have guessed what the little palace mistress screamed next. Just because Ma Xixiang said some harsh things to you while you were being imprisoned, he died so horribly, so horribly. Who is Ma Xixiang? Could it be that nasty, sarcastic, pockmarked guy? This Shen didn't take a single life when leaving Huanhua Palace, he said. So why are you telling me that he died horribly? He then turned to his disciples to whisper, He really died? How horrible was it? He really did die, Mingfan answered, also quiet. It was utterly, utterly horrible. His entire body was green and decayed. They say it was a highly toxic demonic poison. Toxic demonic poison? That very much sounded like Lo Binga's handiwork. That was going to be my guess. I mean, that guy was a dick, but still. Whew. At least he didn't leave, Gangi Shia. Ha! I remembered her name. At least he didn't leave Gangi Shia there, you know what I'm saying? Quibbling is useless, the little palace mistress said. Today, for the deaths of my Huanhua palace disciples, I absolutely must make you pay with your life. This Shen has never been good with poison, and there are hundreds upon thousands of ways to kill your Huanhua palace's disciples, Shenxingqiu countered. Why would I choose the most cumbersome strategy? I did indeed escape from prison, but how can you prove I killed them? Then can you prove you didn't kill them? A Huanhua palace disciple shouted. If Shenxingqiu didn't untangle this, he was afraid that in the future the 2 sects wouldn't ever be able to let the matter rest. He deliberated a little, then probed further. What does your esteemed sex head disciple Gangi Shia have to say about this matter? The little palace mistress's eyes went wide. The tears that had originally stopped started to fall once more. You still dare mention Gangi Shishang? Oh, shit. I spoke too soon. She raised her whip and pointed it at Shen Qingqiu. You think that just because he's dead and can't testify, you can use him however you wish? Shen Qingqiu felt like he'd been struck by lightning. He caught her whip mid-strike between two fingers. He hoped he'd heard wrong. What did you say? Gangi Shia died. When did this happen? Who did it? Even in the original work, the worst part of Gangi Shiao's fate had been an assignment to Wanhua Palace's border territories, where he became a trivial character. Who did it? The little palace mistress asked savagely. You still have the face to ask who did it? Wanhua Palace's disciples surrounded Shen Qingqiu, robes rustling. Kill this despicable villain, the little palace mistress ordered. Take revenge for Gangi Shishang and for the Shishang and Shijie who are guarding the water prison. Satisfy their grudges. Shen Qingqiu's heart went cold. Could Lo Binghe really have slaughtered every last one of the disciples guarding the water prison, including Gangi Shia? And was the loss of those hundreds of lives being blamed on him instead? Stupid brat, you don't get it regardless of what we say, Ningyi said angrily. Don't you see that my Shizun doesn't know? Without hesitation, Qingding Peak's disciples entered the fray as well. However, swords have no eyes, so lest Shen Qingqiu wanted to be stabbed, he had no time for careful thought. As this fight wouldn't end if they continued as they were, he leapt out of the tavern, lightly calling back, Come on out! As he'd hoped, both camps followed after him rather than go for each other, every disciple trying to squeeze out the door first. But as soon as Shen Qingqiu made it onto the main street, he was dumbfounded. A long row of cultivators dressed in various colors were waiting there, ready for battle, glaring like tigers eyeing their prey. Fair enough. After all, they'd made such a large commotion in the tavern. It would have been pretty unscientific if they failed to draw the attention of other people, right? With a light push of his foot, Shen Qingqiu's steps skimmed the roof tiles, and he landed on the eaves with a flip. He took a deep breath, then yelled from the pit of his stomach, Lu Qingge! Someone flew up on their sword and angrily denounced him. Shen Qingqiu, your heart is truly wicked. You purposefully fled to this city, drawing people from various sects here. Was it so you could collude with demons and in one fell swoop reenact the tragedy of the Immortal Alliance Conference? Whatever it takes, our Bachi sect won't let you succeed. So any and all accusations are perfectly acceptable, huh? Shen Qingqiu wasn't even in the mood to rant. Any and all accusations perfectly acceptable. Rings a bell. Remind you of anyone? Then from the east came the hiss of a sword glare, followed by a person in white who arrived on a sword, fast as lightning. Mind you, his descent was too forceful, pointlessly whipping up a powerful wind that threw the Bachi cultivator right off his own blade. Lu Qingge stood securely on Cheng Luan with his arms crossed. What is it? Too reliable, Great Master Lu. Shen Qingqiu said with all sincerity, Get me out of here. Lu Qingge stared. My poison flared up again, and I can't summon the chi to fly my sword. If you don't take me, I'll just plummet from the skies. Lu Qingge let out a sigh. Get on. The crowd gathered to watch from below, berated them without rest, saying things like Sangcheng Mountain abets and shelters evil, and Baijian Peak and Qingjing Peak wallow together in filth. But they both pretended that they couldn't hear. Cheng Luan soared into the sky, the wind whistling in their ears, leaving the 10 or so cultivators who chased them on swords far behind. Where to? Asked Lu Qingge. To the roof of the tallest building in the city, said Shen Qingqiu. After that, please help me hold off these people. What exactly is up with you? If you didn't wish to be imprisoned, why didn't you say so earlier? You've made things so troublesome. Besides, even if Sangcheng Mountain couldn't navigate the water prison, couldn't we have just destroyed it? There was no way to destroy the water prison. Get off. I'm only saying there was no need. I'm still grateful for your kindness, so surely there's no need to throw me down. Something's coming. Shinjing-cho didn't say another word and jumped off at once. The tip of his foot touched tile, and he stooped over on the roof of the building. Chung Luan's momentum was incredibly powerful. Lu Chinga and his sword did a dazzling somersault in midair, and only then did he manage to break, eyes fixed attentively elsewhere. Shinjing-cho also followed his gaze. Then he heard a sneer behind him. Where are you looking? Shinjing-cho nearly stumbled on the spot. That, you just wait and see, hadn't been just talk. Then again, since when had anything about Lo Bing-a been just talk? He'd actually come to capture him, even braving the risk of Shinmo's recoil. How deep did his resentment run? Lo Bing-a glared fixedly at them, expression dark, then slowly extended a hand to Shinjing-cho. Come with me. Gangi Shia is dead, said Shinjing-cho. Lo Bing-a went rigid. The disciples guarding the water prison are also dead, he continued. Lo Bing-a, over 100 Huanhua Palace lives. Also, I'd be hated and persecuted. Was it really worth it? Red flashed into Lo Bing-a's pupils. Whatever. You won't believe me regardless of what I say, he said icily. Then there's no need for more pointless chatter. I'll ask again. Will you come or not? I knew there was probably something more to it. Maybe not necessarily something that fully exonerates him, but something that, like, lessens the blow of, like, he just wiped out, like, 100 people. You know? He stubbornly refused to withdraw that hand. Shinjing-cho had yet to answer when, out of nowhere, over 10 people appeared, hemming them in on the roof while riding their swords. The leader was again that man from Bachi sect. This time, he'd lowered his center of gravity, basically crouched in horse stance upon his sword to prevent himself from being thrown off balance again. He shouted brashly, Shinjing-cho is ours, no one else should even think of... Lo Bing-a abruptly turned his head and yelled, Beat it! He hadn't even drawn his sword, but from his body a powerful blast of spiritual energy burst forth, and a shrill, whistling shriek filled the ears of everyone on the scene. Every last one of the pursuers, along with their swords, was shoved over to fall several meters away. Half of them even slammed into walls or pillars, coughing up fresh blood. The Bachi sect had met someone genuinely... nah. It's the puns. The Bachi sect had met someone genuinely bad-ass, with overbearing chi, and they had been wiped out to the last. The remaining spectators were all terrified. This black-clothed young man's cultivation was undeniably spectacular. How come so few of them had heard of him before? Lu Chinga pushed Shinjing-cho. Go, do what you need to do. Can you handle this by yourself? Shinjing-cho asked. 5-2. He hadn't forgotten these numbers. He'd only called Lu Chinga over to help him fight Small Fry and give him a lift along the way, not to meet a sudden unfortunate end. But neither of these two characters were the sort to, in any way, listen to others. At the first wrong word, without even a word, they started to fight. Chung Luan was incredibly powerful, but Lo Bing-a didn't draw his sword. He concentrated spiritual energy in his hand and used his open palm like a blade to meet it head on. Shinjing-cho knew why Lo Bing-a couldn't draw his sword. In a duel between masters, one couldn't afford a single error, and this was the sort of moment when it was easiest for Shinmo to take advantage of an opening and invade its wielder's mind. If Lo Bing-a was possessed with demonic chi in plain view of everyone and his homicidal urges greatly increased, drawing the blade wouldn't be worth it. Lo Bing-a's body actually housed 2 sets of cultivation systems, one with spiritual chi, the other with demonic chi. Because his dual heritage had successfully integrated, these 2 systems didn't interfere with one another, each operating in excellent form. When necessary, his left and right hands could even use 2 different attack types simultaneously in a display of power. We're just going to continue. We're just going to pretend like that's not hot. But right now, he couldn't draw his sword, and circumstances made it inconvenient for him to access his demonic chi. Thus, his killing power was diminished. For once, he and Lu Chinga were evenly matched. Deafening sounds shook the sky above the roof, white arcs and spiritual energies exploding together. I'm too excited. Their duel was so fierce that none of the cultivators below them dared to rush in recklessly. Even the most inexperienced and undiscerning rookie could see that if one were to so much as graze either man's roiling, murderous chi, they'd ascend right to heaven without any further need to cultivate. Their fight was so fierce that Shen Qingqiu actually felt an answering urge, if not for without a cure having flared up at such an inopportune moment. He too would have wanted to enter the fray, but it was time. He squinted up at the sky, then leapt to the highest level of the building. On the highest roof, a gale screamed. It felt like it could blow him right off. Lo Binghe saw this from afar and was seized by impatience. No longer in the mood to fight, the malevolence in his eyes skyrocketed, and he reached for the hilt of the longsword on his back. He's actually going so far as to draw his sword here? Lo Binghe, don't be rash, Shen Qingqiu called in a rush. Too late, Lo Binghe said harshly. With a flip of his wrist, Shinmo was drawn, wreathed in a dark, billowing chi visible to the naked eye. Chung Luan stabbed straight toward Lo Binghe. He gently flicked Shinmo's blade edge, which was as thin as a cicada's wing. From the center oozed wave after wave of something like a chill, and Chung Luan came to a complete, uncanny stop in midair. Never once had Chung Luan disobeyed Lu Qingge's orders, and he couldn't conceal his shock. But Shen Qingqiu knew that the situation was even more severe. If Lo Binghe really was hit with Shinmo's recoil in this place, the lives of everyone on the scene, as well as in the entirety of Huayue City and within a 50-kilometer radius, would be forfeit. As a last resort, Shen Qingqiu unsheathed Shia. Come here, Lo Binghe. Today, we must come to a resolution. Lo Binghe raised his head and gave him a dark look, and the next moment, he'd flashed forward to around a meter away. Then he raised his hand and drew a barrier that covered the entire roof, isolating them from everyone else. At last, he smiled, expression twisted. Resolution? How can this be resolved? Shizun, at this point, do you really think what's between us can be settled cleanly? Why can't it? Shen Qingqiu breathed in lightly. Though he was clutching his sword, he had no intention of fighting. In truth, wielding this blade at this point would have no effect. As things are now, there's nothing I can say. Sure enough, even if we scheme until we're exhausted, we cannot outwit fate. Lo Binghe chuckled. Fate? What is fate? That which let a 4-year-old child be humiliated while no one lent a hand to help? That which let an innocent old woman die of heartbreak and starvation? With each line he stepped forward, menacing. Or that which let me fight with dogs for scraps? Or let the person I wholeheartedly adored lie to me, abandon me, betray me, and shove me down into a place worse than purgatory with his own 2 hands? Shizun, look at what I've become. Am I strong enough? Do you know how I spent those years within the endless abyss? For 3 years underground, at all times and all moments, my mind thought only of Shizun. I wonder why Shizun would do this to me, why he refused to give me even a single chance to explain or plead my case. You want me to concede that this was the fate the heavens ordained for me? I thought for such a long time, and I finally understood. Within Lo Binghe's smile there lay a spine-chilling malice. None of that is important. It's enough to just do what I want. Fate either never existed at all, or it's something I should trample beneath my feet. With the scorching sun overhead, the last wisps of cloud had disappeared without a trace. Sunlight flooded through the entire city, its brilliance dazzling, like the entire land had been strewn with pure gold. Shen Qingqiu turned his gaze away from the sky, because he'd been staring straight at the sun. Unexpectedly, some tears glistened in his vision. Even though he'd had no other choice, he frankly was greatly responsible for Lo Binghe having reached this point. He had become a dark young man who thought only of revenge on society. Originally, Shen Qingqiu had wanted to stop Lo Bing'e from going to such extremes, but everything he had done had not only failed to have a positive effect, it had actually etched Lo Bing'e's hatred and resentment even deeper into his bones. Lo Bing'e saw how Shen Qingqiu's expression softened without warning and couldn't help but startle. However, in that same moment, an incredible pain assailed his head. He clenched his teeth, his hand clutching tightly around Shin Mo, which was trying to break free. No, he couldn't take the recoil here, at least not at this moment. To his shock, Shen Qingqiu gently said, "Don't let it overpower your mind." Upon hearing this voice, in his daze, Lo Bing'e was transported to those years on Qingjing Peak. It became increasingly harder for him to control himself. There seemed to be a sharp knife churning within his brain, and Shinmo's black flames suddenly surged. Is that how 100 people die? I should keep reading. The assault this time was ferocious. Lo Bing'e was in unbearable agony. When unexpectedly, someone tenderly embraced his shoulders. What followed was a blast of spiritual chi akin to the collapse of a 1,000-kilometer dike, like a rainstorm after a long drought. It poured into Lo Bing'e's body like a flood, extinguishing Shinmo's malevolence with which he had reached a deadlock. Lo Bing'e's breathing evened out, returning to normal, but his heart went cold. Self-detonation. Some in the crowd below were already yelling in shock. Shen Qingqiu self-detonated! Shen Qingqiu let go of Lo Bing'e and slowly backed away, staggering once. Xu Ya fell first. Its master's spiritual energy was gone, and a sword exists with its master. The blade shattered into multiple pieces in midair. Shen Qingqiu had always been in the bad habit of swallowing his blood, but at this moment he could no longer choke it down. Having totally exhausted his spiritual energy, he was now lesser than even a common person, a mere ruined shell. His voice was light and fluttering, the wind blowing most of it away, yet Lo Bing'e could hear him just as distinctly as before. What he said was, "For all that has passed, I repay you today. Think of it as me doing one good thing at the end." Then he toppled backward and off the building. At first, Lo Bing'e only blankly watched. Everything playing out before his eyes was now many times slower. Even the moment in which Shen Qingqiu fell slowed until it was clear crystal. The body dropping in mid-air was like a blood-stained paper kite. Only when Lo Bing'e's body started moving by itself, scrambling to catch Shen Qingqiu before it hit the ground, did he finally discover that Shen Qingqiu's torso was light and insubstantial, his entire body empty, without a wisp of spiritual energy. He truly was akin to a paper kite, liable to be ripped with the slightest force. In fact, one wouldn't need force. It had already fallen apart. Lo Bing'e was still in disbelief. Didn't Shizun hate his blood more than anything? Wasn't he unwilling to even be near him, to associate with him at all? So why, at the last moment, had he so gently helped to contain Lo Bing'e's mind, as tender as he had been in those years long past? Why hadn't he hesitated to help Lo Bing'e suppress Shinmo's recoil, to the point of destroying his own spiritual energy? All around him, people seemed to be muttering things like, "Execute the demon," and "Eliminate your own for the sake of justice." Lo Bing'e's mind was in a muddle. He could only hold Shen Qingqiu and mumble, "Shizun?" The Qingjing Peak disciples had fought the Huanhua Palace disciples the entire way, and finally arrived. Ning Yingying had by now heard that Lo Bing'e was alive. She was both surprised by and happy at the sudden reunion, but then she saw Shen Qingqiu, his eyes peacefully closed. The words she'd been about to say took a turn, and she said in a trembling voice, "Allo, Shizun, what happened to him?" Lu Qingge walked forward, a smear of blood lingering by his lips. His expression was heavy as he said, "He's dead." The disciples were dumbstruck. "Who killed him?" Mingfan suddenly yelled. The crowd's gaze focused on Lo Bing-a. I have no idea what's happening right now. None whatsoever. Hold, please. Strictly speaking, Lo Bing-a hadn't killed Shen Qingqiu, but Shen Qingqiu had indeed self-detonated and died before him. The disciples behind Mingfan drew their swords, about to attack, when Lu Qingge said, "You can't defeat him." Mingfan's eyes were bright red. "Lu Shishu, then surely Lu Shishu can kill him to avenge Shizun, right?" "I can't defeat him either," Lu Qingge said lightly. Mingfan choked. Lu Qingge wiped away the blood by his mouth. Neither did he kill Shen Qingqiu. However, though he didn't kill Shen Qingqiu did indeed die because of him. Each of Lo Qingge's words was like a knife drawn from a sheath. Xiangchong Mountain must avenge this grudge. Lo Bing-a turned a deaf ear to it all. His mind was entirely a mess and totally at a loss, and he still held Shen Qingqiu's rapidly cooling body. It seemed like he wanted to call out to Shen Qingqiu to shake him awake, but also didn't dare to, as if he were afraid of being scolded. He murmured, "Shizun?" "Stop calling him Shizun," Mingfan snapped. "Shizun can't bear such a burden. My brethren, let's fight together. So what if we can't defeat him? What more can he do than kill us?" Ning Ying spread her arms to stop him. Mingfan was furious and agitated. He thought that Ning Ying was still clinging to old affections. "Shimei, look what it's come to. How come you still don't get it?" "You shut up," said Ning Ying. "What would Shizun think if you rushed to your death like this? If he heard, what would he say? Shizun would rather be infected than see us taken advantage of or bullied, yet you'd throw your life away so easily? She's a fucking queen." "She's a queen. I don't make the rules. She's young, and she's female, and she's pure and precious, which means she's probably fucking dead, but she's a queen, and she's mine." All these years, Ning Ying had always had the charming attitude of a young maiden. At these abrupt, harsh words, Mingfan halted. After a long while, tears burst forth and flowed down his face. Sobbing, he wept miserably. "But it's so unfair to Shizun. Even though he absolutely didn't collude with demons, everyone kept saying that he did, that he was a killer, a degenerate, and they threw him in the water prison. He didn't even get a chance to clear his name." He choked on his sobs. Even though he obviously loved this brat so much, at the Immortal Alliance conference, he bet 5,000 spirit stones on him without hesitation. His hopes for him were that high. Whenever anyone praised him, Shizun would be so happy. And afterward, he refused to return Zhengyang to Wanjian Peak and insisted on keeping it so he could erect a sword mount on the back of the mountain. He was heartbroken for so long. And in the end, this is what he got. Lo Bing-a listened in a trance, unsure if this was illusion or reality. Is that so? At that time, Shizun too was utterly heartbroken. Ning Ying stepped toward Lo Bing-a. Her eyes were red, but her words and breathing were steady. "Alo, we weren't there for the Jinlan City incident, but we all heard about it. I don't know why you didn't return to Singchong Mountain despite being alive, and I don't know why you wouldn't stand up for Shizun, and I certainly don't know what happened at the Immortal Alliance conference. But Shizun's kindness when he raised and nurtured you, and his feelings when he doted on and protected you, those weren't fake. Everyone knows. We saw for ourselves." After a pause, she continued, "If you feel that the Shizun in the old days didn't treat you well, then think back on the day you lost your jade pendant. Our Shishion inexplicably backed off all at once. You yourself knew there was something strange, right? No one else on Qingjing Peak would turn leaves into weapons for the purpose of teaching a small lesson. Lo Binga involuntarily clutched Shen Qingqiu tighter. He whispered, I was wrong, Shizun. I really know I was wrong. I never wanted to kill you. My words end here, Ning Yingying declared. If Shizun really did wrong you in some way, and you can't under any circumstances forgive him, then at least today he finally repaid it all, right? So from now on, you... At this point, she couldn't take it anymore and turned her head away. I ask that you stop calling him Shizun. Repaid? That's right. Moments ago, Shizun had said something about repaying him. Had Shen Qingqiu been saying that in exchange for pushing Lo Binga into the endless abyss, he would also fall for his sake? Lo Binga started to panic. I don't want you to repay me. I just couldn't get over my anger. He was speaking to himself. I couldn't get over it. Whenever you saw me, you acted like you'd seen a ghost. Then you would happily smile and laugh with others, when in the past you only did that with me. And to me, you would say only the bare minimum to me, and you kept suspecting me of everything, but I was wrong. He stammered and stuttered, talking as he wiped the blood away from Shen Qingqiu's face. You disdained me for being a demon, so I was afraid that if I returned directly to Sengcheng Mountain, you'd throw me out. I thought that if I took over Huanhua Palace and became like you, a leader of righteous cultivators, I could maybe make you happy. Lo Binga's voice trembled. Shizun, I really... And they have the fucking nerve to end the chapter there. Like there. The nerve. The unmitigated fucking gall. The audacity to end it fucking there. There. That's the chapter. There's no more. There's a whole blank page. There's nothing left of the... There's more blank page that follows the end of the chapter, because that was the end of the chapter. Is this how we find out about... I don't really know. Is this how we find out about, like, who Qingqiu, like, actually was? Does he get, like, reintegrated into the system? Couldn't be as a different character. There would be different character. There would be different art on the covers of these books. There are just so many different ways that it could go, given the whole conceit of the entire thing. The character himself could also just be brought back to life. Right? Like, this Shen Qingqiu could just be brought back to life somehow by Lo Binga doing something. He's got demonic chi. Who the fuck knows? He could also bring him back. There could be, and I had kind of already thought that maybe something like this would happen, but I hadn't really given it much thought at all, which is why I hadn't, like, said anything, because I didn't think it was all that likely. But there could be, like, a sort of, at least in some way, a new game plus. Like, the guy, I forget his real name, but, like, Shen Qingqiu gets to start over from a certain point, like his last save. Self-saving system, actually, that, you know, somewhat makes sense. Like, he gets to go from, like, a little bit behind and then play things out differently, which would be really cool, actually. Or he just gets to, like, come back as a whole different character. Or something. Because it's gotta be something. It can't be, like, anything as, like, batshit crazy as, like, we just don't, like, the guy as Shen Qingqiu just isn't a part of the story anymore. Because that's what the whole romantic arc is. So that has to happen in some way. We have to get this guy back in some way. So like, I just don't know. I think the two most obvious ones. The most obvious one is that Lobing figures out a way to actually like bring him back, and it's because he's so distraught over everything, which understandable. Brings it back, which would be really interesting. I would really like that too. Shen Qingqiu thinking that he had sacrificed and then sitting up and all of a sudden he's like back now. That would be really cool. But also getting to New Game Plus it and going back a little bit to like load the last save or what have you would also be really cool. I think we're probably going to hang around for a little bit. Maybe in Lobinga's head, which will also be really cool. Because then we won't know like at which angle it's going to come from, right? At which way this is going to be resolved. There are a few different ways that it could go. Somebody asked a D&D question. Hang on. What? Oh, an MXTX D&D campaign? How do you mean? I mean, absolutely 1000%. But, like, do you mean would I ever design one, like, for the group that I have? Or the wife? I play 2 games. I have a game with a group of friends that includes the wife, and then I have a one-on-one game where I just DM for the wife. The web novel version of the chapter title is The Protagonist Dies, the End. I hate her. I just hate her. Like set in one of her worlds, so use it as a campaign setting? Yeah, absolutely. I totally would. That's probably fairly inevitable. I was at the very least going to have a book that lets you kind of like dimension hop, realm and dimension hop. So you can hop into all these worlds and use that as like an excuse to let the party hop into all these fictional worlds that one or more of us really loves. And there was at least going to be a stint where they land in the cultivation world. Probably for Modazushi. Because that's the one that the wife is familiar with and I'm familiar with. And it's so cool that the other 2 players at the tables who would have no idea what was going on, that would also be hilarious to watch them try to figure it out. So yes, I would. Absolutely. The stopping point for the next stream, that's actually a good, let's see if I can figure that out ahead of time. 166. So it should be like 210 to 20 something. Let me see. Chapter 10. We may just get through like the whole chapter. Because that's about 50 pages. That's like a little bit short. 50 pages, yeah. Yeah, I think we'll do chapter 9 on Monday, and that'll be the reading session for Monday since we read a few pages ahead today. Yeah. So we'll get through all of chapter 9 on Monday. Is one of those frustrating things where you don't think that anything like that was going to happen, and then it happens, and it's like, well, of course that had to happen for like a variety of reasons. Not just that it kind of throws a bomb in the middle of the story, but also just for the progression of the romantic arc that's happening and whatever the fuck is going on with Lobinga. You know? It's so weird. It's like you're so shocked for the first like 5 seconds where you're like, what do you mean? How could this possibly be happening? What the fuck is she doing? And then it all makes sense. At the very least, within the context she's currently provided, who knows what the fuck will be added to it later on down the line. But in the moment, and then all of a sudden it makes sense. Because you're like, fucking of course. We needed a turning point like this. He needed a way to make amends for kicking him into the endless abyss. And what other way? Like, of course. Plus, wouldn't this solve the problem of him being... See, like, here's the thing. This is also kind of a very D&D type question. If he just comes back, if Lobing is just brought back, is he brought back, does he still have that poison problem? Or is that like a status effect that gets wiped upon being dead and coming back? Is that in his system anymore? I don't know. That's a good question. It's kind of iffy in D&D too. Like, it depends. Like, you lose some things, but not everything. Interesting. There's just so many questions now. There's so many questions. And then also the best boy died. That's always sad. Ning Ying finally arrived. Like, arrived. Which means she's totally dead. This is not my first rodeo at this point. She's totally dead. If I end the story with her alive, that will be the biggest plot twist that MXTX could have possibly come up with. She's young. She's charming. She's female. She's kind of awesome. She's as awesome as she is sweet. She's dead. She's totally dead. She's a queen. She's definitely a queen. She's dead. She's so dead. Whether or not Ming Fun dies too, I feel like almost entirely depends on whether or not they get together romantically. Probably. But she's definitely dead. She's so dead. And I'm saying, like, I'm not going to be heartbroken at the time. But no, I'll be crying, sobbing, bawling my eyes out when it happens. Even though I fully know that it's going to happen. Because MXTX is the devil. But she's totally dead. So, we get to read Chapter 9 on Monday. We will very clearly and very obviously be finishing this volume next week. And that's kind of terrifying because even though there are 4 volumes, just in case you didn't know, there are 4 volumes to this, but volume 4, if I am not mistaken, is mostly additional stories, like way mostly, if not possibly like entirely so, but it's practically entirely like extra stories. So it's really these 3 books. That is my understanding. And so that means we only really have 1 volume after this. Which means she has to kick it into Act 3 gear by the end of this volume. Yeah, see, volume 4 is all extras. So by the end of this one, she has to... Okay. Before, like, literally right before I sign off, at the end of this volume, she has to kick it into Act 3 gear. And she just killed the protagonist halfway through this volume. So, what on earth is either at the end of this volume or the beginning of the last one that constitutes a ratchet up to Act 3 level tension that was somehow more impactful than killing the main character? She scares me. She continues to be terrifying. And on Monday, we'll continue down this path that she has now made for herself. I had a fucking blast. I don't know about you guys, but I had the best time. Also kind of the worst time, because he's fucking dead. In hindsight, I don't know how you would have to be able to say, well, she named the chapter Death. She's gonna kill the main guy. But I felt like that should have at least been a possibility, especially, considering that this is in some kind of gamified world, right? And that she'd be able to pull some bullshit like that. That probably should have crossed my mind. That she was gonna kill Shen Xingqiu. That probably should have. Anyway, I don't like her. So, I will see you guys on Monday. I love you all very, very much. Please take care of yourselves. And come hang out on Monday. And we'll just see. We'll just find out. All right? Bye, guys. Have a wonderful weekend.